Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us for the Let My People Go webinar. What we do once a month, every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, is to really talk about how our local churches can love those who are most vulnerable in our community, the people that traffickers target, the people whose backs are up against the wall. How can we come alongside of them in a way that is helpful, but also appropriate? We don't want to care for people and just bring them into a more exploitative situation. We want to be a place of healing. We want to be part of their continuum of care. And so with that, I feel that the best way to start today's talk is to really look to the scriptures. We're going to be reading Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 25. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? You see, at this point in the text, we see this lawyer who is trying to expose Jesus and point out to everyone that he was a phony. We see this lawyer having to take a step back and justify himself and make sure that he had a doable alternative, because he knew that he couldn't love everyone who was his neighbor. But if he got to choose his neighbor, then maybe he could do that. And we do the same thing. So ultimately, for us, we can see ourselves in this lawyer, but Jesus continues, and he tells him a story. He says, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. And now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And so likewise, a Levite. This is basically a religious teacher, someone whose own teaching said that we must love our neighbor. The book of Leviticus. A Levite came to the place, and he saw this man, and he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. This is very interesting, because Samaritans and those in ancient Israel, they were separated culturally. You see, like the Samaritan, his own ethnic identity pointed to his idolatry in the eyes of those in ancient Judaism. When the Assyrians came in and conquered the northern kingdom, they intermarried. And so when those in the southern kingdom would see this, they would say, southern kingdom of Israel, they would say, we won't even walk through their land. We don't even want the dust on us, because when the judgment comes, we want no part of it. They are idolaters. And so there was cultural and ethnic divisions there. And so a good Jew of the time would go nowhere near a Samaritan. And we see Jesus kind of talking about this. But we have this Samaritan saying, or going up to him and having compassion. It says, he went to him, he bound up his wounds, poured on oil and wine, and then set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. The Samaritan understood that there was a cost to loving his neighbor, his most vulnerable neighbor. And then Jesus says in verse 36, Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers? And the lawyer said, The one who showed him mercy. He couldn't even utter the name Samaritan. And Jesus said to him, You go and do likewise. Tonight, we are going to talk about how we can identify those who are most vulnerable in our community. And what Let My People Go does, as we partner with a local church, is we help them do a community needs assessment. We help them assess really what's going on in their community, because oftentimes we may think we know what's happening, but we don't really know. So the only way to do this is to dive into your community, get your hands dirty, and really see what's going on. Really talk to those who are living amongst you that you may just walk by. And to do this, I have asked Jimmy Orakoya, Reverend Jimmy Orakoya, to join me. Jimmy was one of our first partners with the Let My People Go pilot project, and he has been with us since the start. And he is someone who knows firsthand how to assess the needs of his community. And so, Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us. Could you share a little bit more about who you are and what you do currently?
Well, hey, how you doing, Riley? And everybody who's listening, good evening. What's up? Representing the Bronx out here. That's good. So yeah, man, I'm a co-founder of By Storm, which is a ministry. Oftentimes we consider ourselves a church for some, a network for many, a group or a collective of artists and unique individuals. But at the end of the day, we're all family in Christ, and that's what we try to be for those that are in our neighborhoods, in our communities, those that we have influence around, and those that we engage with. We provide teaching resources. We do gatherings on a weekly basis, whether it can be in a coffee shop, at a community center, a restaurant, or in the park. We provide youth services and connections for individuals to resources and other organizations that can provide services for them. But at the end of the day, we're really considering ourselves individuals who equip others with the tools to take life by storm. And that can be a broad sense, but at the same time, it's very defined at the same time. You don't know what a person needs until you engage them. You don't know what your neighbor needs from you or even from the Lord until you engage them. So oftentimes that equipping process starts out with a conversation. So we've done everything from parkour ministry to human trafficking advocacy in the projects, conversations and meetups with Muslim and Christian leaders, young women and older women, multi-generational mentoring groups around makeup and discussion in the community, service learning projects with our guys called the Brotherhood to try and meet the needs of younger men who oftentimes would be considered, for lack of a better word, endangered of a satisfying or self-sufficient future. So we at By Storm try to equip in any way we can. We meet weekly again, and we try to be a church for those that normally wouldn't go into church. So we often don't necessarily meet in church buildings. So you might see us at a park with like 20-some people in the corner, but that's church, and where we're at, that's where the Spirit of the Lord is. We're thankful for our relationship with Let My People Go. It's been pretty good. Riley's been a good friend to me over the years, and a mentor and a friend, as well as a teacher in many ways. He might smile and say, "Word, really?" But yes, you have, man. Good dude. Good conversations in Harlem and in the Bronx, and it's been good. But all that being said, with Let My People Go, it's been great in helping us fine tune what we do. If you don't mind me sharing a little bit about our conversation earlier, Raleigh, it's kind of that thing of like, you're the person that's out there been doing all this stuff as the director, the teacher, the professor or whatever, the pastor. But at the same time, there are times when you want someone else to come in and teach and help refine those that are amongst you. And it's great to be able to say, you know what, even though I can do a community needs assessment, I can teach on it and do a workshop. I know that I can send people to those, send people to Raleigh and Let My People Go to help with equipping them to help those that are considered, for lack of a better word, the most vulnerable. A lot of things that we do also center around education for those that are, for lack of a better word, on the scales for those that inequality related to education. But you guys have been a great help. You don't mind me kind of bragging on you guys for a second, do you? No? You good?
Yeah, that's
Go
fine.
ahead. I can brag on you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If you like.
So I'm always repped our little trophy that we have. Um,
Trophy's amazing.
yeah, prior to my current position, I'm bivocational. My current position is director of New Settlement Community Center in the Mount Eden section of Bronx. I was the director of Gun Hill Community Center. So for 2 years in a row, Let My People Go came alongside us as a ministry and as an organization to help equip a lot of the young people and some of my staff at Gun Hill in doing community needs assessment around human trafficking. We were an award-winning youth organization. We got the award for teen action and community justice and social advocacy. And a lot of our teens, based on a lot of the information that they gathered doing this Let My People Go work, were able to actually teach at Baruch College to college students and also their peers. So it's been a blessing, man, to be in this relationship. And I think I'm gonna shut up now and we're gonna move over. So, all right, man. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And if this is the first time you've ever joined us for a webinar, we do this once a month on the LMPG network page, the Let My People Go Facebook page. And so we definitely want you to join us next time. But we also have wonderful resources on our website, lmpgnetwork.org. And one of those resources is a video about By Storm and these students who were teaching other people about human trafficking and empowering others. And it's an incredible video. And so I would challenge you to check it out, and you will see really what Jimmy is talking about there. And you'll be able to watch it. You can show it in your churches. I mean, it's really a great video. And so with that said, though, I want to transition to really the subject of the day, and that is, how do we assess the needs of our community? And so, Jimmy, could you share with us a little bit about the nature of a community needs assessment? Like, what is it?
Well, like community needs assessment identifies the strengths and weaknesses, areas of problems that sometimes occur in our communities and our contexts. They vary depending on what's going on. It could be health related, it could be educational, but oftentimes it's helping you to identify those that are most vulnerable in your community and how you can best serve them and create an action plan around it. It helps you to also determine your assets and your stakeholders and who can come alongside you, whether or not you want to do this solo to the glory of God, but you want to collaborate, with those that are here already doing the work, but also need others like you. So that's a community needs assessment.
And so I love what you're saying, because with what we do at Let My People Go, our goal is to help people find those who are most vulnerable. But we say, don't do this on your own. If you really want to find people who are vulnerable, talk to the people who are already working with vulnerable populations in your community, because you can learn a lot from them. It is absolutely great to have outside networks that you're a part of. I mean, we're one of them. We want to be that for the local church, but it's really something very important and near and dear to my heart to help churches connect with the networks that are already in their community, to work with the people who may be under-resourced or undervalued in your community, because these people are on the front lines. And so we help churches address vulnerability from a congregational as well as a collaborative standpoint. And so with that, as we are doing community needs assessments, Jimmy, what are some pro tips? Because it can get really confusing. We can get in over our heads. We can zig when we should have zagged. We can get off track. How do we do this well?
Let's see. I would say again, determine your community assets. A lot of times people think that they need to be a sociology major or something, or bring in somebody who's got a master's in social work to come and do an assessment or to determine what their assets are in your community. Sometimes just going to the bodega across the street and just standing there and just seeing who comes across your path can help you understand. Googling your community online can be very helpful. Determine your community stakeholders, whether it's the police or the local churches, some nonprofits that are in your area that might be doing things related to the work that you might observe on a general basis, and then might even be able to give you some information so you can collect data. Data is very broad. I might have to send some resources or information over to you, man, just to discuss where the different realms of data collecting can go. But something as simple as going online and getting the census information is good. Going to your local precinct or hospital and speaking to those that are in the intake office. Some of that information is actually easily accessible with the right conversation. Starting points. And then last but not least, I would say some pro tips. Create an action plan around the problems. So whatever is observed, determine what it is that you're going to take action against. Now, for me, and what we've been doing at Bystorm and what's been helpful in a lot of my different areas of work and service, been in New Orleans, in Gretna, West Bank, and Ninth Ward, and East New Orleans area. Served in Somerville and Cambridge, Massachusetts, and in various parts of the Bronx now, and as well as Westchester and Mount Vernon and Yonkers, which is some pretty tough areas, man. Doing some gang intervention and reentry work for guys coming out of prison. There's some things that I've kind of collected as my little talking points when it comes to doing the action plan. And it talks about being dietarily fit. But I'm a big guy, man. I'm always on a diet or some form. I need to stay committed. But all that being said, what are the problems? What are those areas that affect you? So within your diet, are there human problems that are affecting you? And it's a mindset issue. What are those cultural barriers or mindsets that you need to overcome? What's going on with your processing? What's the processing of the people in your community? Some people really look at some of the issues that are going on and don't think that it could ever overcome them.
Right.
They don't see it as a collective coming together on decision making to affect and influence policy. So is it a process problem? What's going on? Structural. Some things are geographical. Sometimes it's just access to the right things, whether it be food. You might be living in a food desert. Sometimes it might be structural in the sense of architecture. Sometimes the buildings, the art. I'm big on the Duns and Duns model in educational psychology. Like sometimes the colors and the architecture around you is not conducive for certain mindsets and for certain growth. And then also structural in regards to resources, man. What's around you? What's able to help you and the individuals that you're wanting to serve in accomplishing themselves, or even, for lack of a better word, getting on the path to self-sufficiency. And then what are those institutional areas? What organizations are a part of the problem, and what institutions are helping? And that'll help you get a better understanding of who you align yourself with. Because sometimes people, you might say, oh, well, they're a big organization, they're doing this in the community, they've been here for 70-something years or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're part of the cyclical issues that are going on. Mm-hmm. So you need to be very mindful about who you're connecting yourself with. And yeah, man, at the end of the day, discernment. So ask the Lord to lead.
I really appreciate that. That's rich, because it's interesting. We want to do this. We want to assess the needs of our community. We want to help people. I think I haven't met anyone in the church who's like, yeah, I actually just hope that every vulnerable person in our community just continues to suffer and we continue to exclude them. Like, you don't see anyone saying that. You see people saying, we want to help, we care, but we don't know how. Now, some people may be afraid to help. That may be a completely different thing. But a lot of people, they're just at a loss. And I think what you just gave us is very helpful for us as we think through this. And so as we're kind of processing this, I would be remiss if I did not say that there are challenges, there are barriers. We are going to try to do a needs assessment and we're going to hit a brick wall. And honestly, I've seen several churches do this, and they are dead set on loving their community, but as soon as they get involved, they start running into these barriers. And many of them, within like 2 to 3 months, if they don't have someone walking with them, like what Let My People Go does. And that's basically why we formed, because we realized a lot of churches weren't tapped into a network like this. If they don't have someone who's there to help them along the way, it's easy to fall into the temptation to say, we're not good at this. There's no way we can help. Leave it to the professionals. And then we just walk away.
Right.
And so, Jimmy, what are some of the barriers that churches face as they attempt to assess the needs of their community and become more involved in the lives of those in their community?
Wow. So, I was just listening to what you just said, man, and this might be something we talk about over breakfast one day. But it's tough, man. I don't know if I've ever told you. I've had scenarios where I've tried to come alongside with churches and just plug people in. That's why sometimes I say Bystorm is a church for many, who wouldn't necessarily go to church. We've tried to plug young people that we've met and said, hey, you've already got the space, you've got a youth ministry. We've reached this young person or this family or this person who's very vulnerable. They're on the edge, but we know that you have the resources that we should connect them to. And there can be a God-sized relationship that can occur here. And sometimes I'll hear things like, my insurance doesn't cover these kids, man. Like, what's going on? So it's tough. It's kind of this not in my backyard mentality at times too, that goes on. And that goes two ways. That goes, one, I don't realize that this problem is even occurring, and I was completely oblivious to it. I have a heart, but I didn't realize it was happening literally on my corner, in my backyard.
Yeah.
And then it's also kind of the thing where even though you might realize it's there, you don't want to really address it because you know that there's certain things that are going to have to change within yourself. And that becomes a barrier at times as well, where we want to change others, but we don't necessarily want to change ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be very mindful of that, be very reflective and introspective on how we deal with that. I do a teaching as well on the Good Samaritan, and I got my big three. But I'm gonna throw my three, and then I'm gonna end with the last one that we've talked about as well. The fear of vicarious trauma, man. That kind of or secondary trauma that comes in. It's kind of this whole thing of like, if I deal with somebody and their issues, I might literally take on their emotions. I might deal with their drama. I might, I don't necessarily want to deal with that. If you say to somebody, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And they're like, well, if you really ask, let me tell you what's going on with me. This is where I need help. And then you're like, oh man, oh wow, or you start dealing with people's pain and it transfers over. And you start realizing that at times, you don't necessarily know if you're equipped to deal with that. You don't know how to refer out, for lack of a better word. I think there's a discernment process in the midst of all of that. I feel like I'm simplifying something that could be a deeper conversation, but you think so too, right? But at the end of the day, man, there's a fear of that. There's a fear of taking on another person's trauma. Yeah. There's aspects of apathy. It's like the Levite or the other person that was walking through, and it's like, I see you in your situation, but I don't know how much I'm willing to invest.
Yeah.
And that's heavy, There's other aspects of compassion fatigue. You've given too much, and now you're tired. And that becomes a barrier at times too, where people they've dealt with certain things, and they go, now I'm in Christ, but do I really got to deal with it? Can't you just send Riley? Riley knows how to do it. I've done this for about 3 months now, and I'm realizing it's a lot harder than I thought it was. I'm tired, Lord. But then also there's an issue of xenophobia. And man, I think that's our biggest hurdle in today's society. It seems to not change, unfortunately. We just kind of pick a different thing. And there's a lot of different cultural barriers as well to that. I mean, if you want to engage in that conversation, let me know, Riley. Let me, let's talk about that, man. So I'm looking very chocolate on this camera right now, so we can talk even more about that.
It's interesting because a lot of people have no idea that every one of us carries with us our own xenophobic biases.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know until someone who's not like us comes into our path. And it's interesting because I've just noticing how humans interact with one another. We tend to like to choose our neighbor. We like to pick the people that we love. We like to pick the people that we serve. And oftentimes they can look a lot like us. It's like we find safety and protection in this comfortable, almost uniformity. But it's interesting, that's not something that's just unique to people in an American culture. It can happen worldwide, but it's not even unique to our time period. We see the lawyer saying, desiring to justify himself, he said, "Who is my neighbor?" He wanted a more doable alternative. He wanted someone that he could say, yes, that's my neighbor. And then Jesus tells a story to show him who his real neighbor is. It's someone completely different than you. And so as we're doing community needs assessments, what is your advice for churches who, as they're learning to love their community, they learn, wow, we need to be a safe place for everyone in our community, not just the people who share our common backgrounds. And so what would be your advice for basically crossing the street and engaging people who may not have everything in common with you?
This might sound contradictory to what you just asked me, but finding the commonalities in the midst of the uncommonalities.
No, that's good.
You know, I always joke. One of the things that's always been an icebreaker for me is the fact that I'm a third culture person. But what also works, and oftentimes as well, is the fact that I love food. And something as simple as engaging somebody over a meal, or being willing to invite another person to a meal to discuss something as simple as that can lead to a conversation. Like I was saying earlier, a conversation with the people that pass by the corner store can make you someone that now people can say, well, hey, you know what? I see him over and over again. There's something about that individual. They're greeting me, and just greeting, saying hi. What's going on in your community? What's going on with you? How's your day? Something as simple as that. And it sounds oversimplified, but it is really that simple. I say this all the time. It really is that simple. Go greet the dude that's at the bodega. Go greet the person that comes in and says, yo, Habibi, it was good. And then engage that person in a conversation. So where are you from? Where's your family from? I'm from here, or I'm from there, or I have a cousin or a grandparent that came from this place, and start a simple conversation, and then let that bridge you into something else about how can I better serve this area? What do you think is going on in this community? What about these kids, man? Like, what's going on? Start a conversation. Go volunteer at a school. Your kids, depending on where you're at, if your kids go to school in that community where you're actually in, something as simple as going to the parent coordinator and saying, hey, hi, my child goes here, but my church does a group where we want to help serve and work with young people and figure out what's going on. Can you help us get a better understanding of what's going on? What are the issues that you're facing here in educating the young people here? Going to the park and meeting the mothers who are sitting there on a Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon with their children and just saying hi. I can't overemphasize or overstress the importance of, or the power of, a simple hello. And that fear that's within yourself that might say, oh, I've been hurt, or I've been slighted, or I've seen this go wrong for somebody else. You got to wake up and you got to ask God for grace and strength to be able to overcome that, because there's an anxiety that can take place. But God will equip, man. God will equip.
And it's interesting because also with fear, there's always an underlying assumption there. You're leading from a potential false assumption about someone or a people group. And so you write these people off. It may be those in the homeless community. It may be those in the immigrant community. It may be those who are just new to the community. But it's interesting because if we lead from our assumptions, we'll just keep avoiding the people that are right in front of us. But I think if we lead from learning, and if we lead from listening, and actually intentionally trying to get to know the person. And I had someone once ask me, because we had a mission team here in the city, and we were working with different people throughout New York City, those who are currently homeless, those who are currently immigrants and new to the city. And we were just sending teams out just to talk to them and engage them and just serve and care for people, and just really basically just to learn more and to love and to learn how to love by doing. And it was interesting because one person said, "Hey, this is great. And I get that you want us to talk to our homeless neighbors, but how do we do that?" And I worked really hard to not be snarky or to say anything that would come off as a put down, because I wouldn't want to ever do that. But for me, the answer, like you say, is very simple. It's this idea of communion, just sitting with the person and saying, "Hey, I'm Raleigh. What's your name?" They may or may not want to talk, and that's entirely up to them. And we need to honor that.
Right.
But there's this aspect of simplicity when it comes to addressing complex needs. You start with what you have, you know? And I've learned more about my community from those who are most vulnerable in it, who I've gotten to know on a first-name basis. And it's just, they've taught me so much about life, you know? And it's just, you get to a point where you realize you can't look down on anyone when you realize you're standing on the same level. And the scriptures show us, even this parable shows us, that we are broken, that we will always choose the wrong thing. But the beauty of our brokenness is that we're all equally broken,
right,
in the sight of God. Like, regardless of our background, regardless of whether we are a faithful Jew in ancient Israel, or if we're a Samaritan, we're separated from God by our sin. And the only way into God's presence is through a bridge, and that bridge being the cross of what Jesus did for us when he lived, died, and rose in our place. And so one thing that I think is beautiful is you talked about a commonality. One thing that we have in common with everyone in our community, regardless of our cultural backgrounds, regardless of our socioeconomic backgrounds, the thing that we have in common is vulnerability. We may spend our whole life running from it, but we have it. And our issues may differ from the issues of those in our community. But if we operate from a place of brokenness, then we're standing on the same level, and it's really hard to look down on somebody from that vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with that said, it's not all, gosh, we think about doing this and it sounds really good at first, but we often don't think about the cost. And we see that it costs the Samaritan. What are some of the costs to loving those in your community, Jimmy? And this is the note that we'll end on.
That's a good one. The cost. One, sometimes it'll cost you some money.
Mm-hmm.
Two, it might cost you your false expectations, and I think that's something we should welcome. You might lose a couple of friends. Why are you hanging out with these individuals? Why are you extending yourself for these individuals? But at the end of the day, it's the love of Christ, love of God that pushes you and empowers you to do this. I think another thing that sometimes, when you think about counting the cost, you lose self. I don't know if I'm answering this right for you, man. But this, and it's tough because I grew up a little bit different in this regard. When you say counting the cost, it's like, yeah, what do you lose, and then what are your things you gain? But all that being said is, the cost, you lose your friends, you lose your money. Sometimes you lose your self-esteem because you wake up sometimes, and like we were talking about earlier, you have this mindset of, what, I have to press through. I have to deal with attacks and accusations. You might have to just sit down and say, what, in spite of someone being rude, insulting you, you might deal with somebody who's saying, what, you're the other, in your attempt to go and bridge the gap with the other. You still have to sit down and say, what, I'm gonna press through. And it's weird to me, but at the same time, it's actually a good thing to me. Take it with joy, man. Take it with joy. God restores. God reimburses. It may not be monetarily, but He'll reimburse you in a different way. Yeah, man. I don't know. I hope I answered that as best as possible.
No, that's incredible, because there's this aspect of us, we want to grow in isolation, but we can't. We can't grow in isolation.
You have to engage, man. You have to engage.
And when you engage, bad things happen. You hit adversity. People say things. People question your motives. People may take advantage. I can't tell you how many people have told me, well, we were working with these people in our community, and as they came in, we noticed that our sound equipment was done. It was gone. Someone stole it. And so we're a little cautious about working with anyone in our community. And this is when I say, I've heard this from a lot of churches. How about you lock up your sound equipment? How about you love people, but you also lock it up, these, like, people in your community, regardless of what they've been through, regardless of where they're at now, we're called as the church to love and serve our communities, not just the people that look like us, not just the people that talk like us, not just the people that act like us. Mm-hmm. And
being given doesn't necessarily mean you can't take caution.
Right.
You can use discernment.
Yes. Yeah, you can be wise. But I think sometimes we make excuses. Well, who is my neighbor? We try to justify, well, we tried to help, but no. We're called to love our neighbor. And Jesus doesn't even get into why the priest and the Levite walked by at all. He just says they walked by. And that's the point. We're called to, rather than walk by, walk to the people that are in front of us. And like Mother Teresa said, love the person in front of you. Mm-hmm. And love them until it hurts.
Yep. Do it anyway.
Huh?
Do it anyway.
Do it anyway. Absolutely. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you, Riley.
Oh, likewise. And everyone who this is their first time on the Let My People Go webinar, our goal is just to kind of talk through these things and really wrestle through how we can love those most vulnerable, because ultimately that's the mission of Let My People Go, to empower the local church to fight human trafficking by loving those most vulnerable. We believe that once you love those who traffickers target, you're going to be caring for those who could be trafficked, who are being trafficked, and who have been trafficked, simply by loving your neighbor. And so thank you for joining us today. And I ask you to check out our website at LMPG, like Let My People Go, lmpgnetwork.org, and check out our Facebook group, Let My People Go, and it's basically at LMPG Network. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next month, 6:30 p.m. on the first Tuesday of that month. Thank you so much, and see you then.
God bless everybody. Take care.